The drill, so we won't spend much time on that. Coming up next week is the first Sunday of the month, so there'll be a potluck. We'll also have the membership council after the new meal. One thing to think about is we try to do a kind of a social event or something fun every month. This month it was the mystery supper the other night, sometimes to go to the park. We don't have anything planned for next month yet, so if you have any ideas, they don't have to be big. We don't have to do a mystery supper or something big like that every month, but it can be something that's just after church you go to the park. But if you have an idea, either this coming month or months in the future, that'd be fine as well. A couple things we could do just to get your head spinning. We could do a game night. We get together and play games. Could do a music night. Get together and sing, or night or afternoon, whatever. Any other ideas right off the bat that anybody thinks of?
Movie night.
Could do movie night.
You can watch a couple movies.
We can go. We can go to a park and go hiking sometime. It might be a little hard to do it. We're local here, but there's some parks that have some hiking. We could all do that together. So yeah, think about it. Next one Sunday we'll discuss it. Huh? Ranieri does that one.
That's right. You're right. You gotta run it.
So next Sunday we'll talk about that, but you can think about that this next week. Okay, we're back in Matthew again this morning. And a little bit of review last week. They ended up with the woes. Woe to you. Who's he talking to? Woe to... Well, first of all, what does woe mean?
Too bad.
Too bad? Or shame? Or unfortunate? Or...
Woe is me.
Yeah. Or maybe even a little bit of a curse. A little bit like that. But that's the idea of woe. So who is the woes to? Scribes and Pharisees, the leaders.
Hypocrites.
Yep, the hypocrites, the leaders of the Jewish people at this time. You shut the kingdom of heaven in people's faces. Same people who are supposed to reveal the kingdom of God are shutting the doors, keeping people out. It says you make your proselytes twice as much as the child of hell as yourself. Okay, I guess we're just getting started now. You make a mockery of honesty with your swearing. You tithe every leaf you pick from your garden. Every little thing you pick from your garden. You tithe that, make sure you don't miss anything, but you forget mercy, justice, and faithfulness. You clean the outside of the cup and the plate, but the inside's dirty, especially the part that you need to take care of. The inside is what you leave dirty, and you make sure the outside's clean, the side that everybody else sees, but you're not drinking out of. You outwardly appear righteous to others, but within, you're full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. Ouch. And the last one is you murder the prophets and the teachers. And this is the state, Jesus is saying this is the state of the Jewish nation, especially the leadership at this point in time. Not a very good picture for God's people. And then he finishes out chapter 23 with this kind of this curse of this pronouncement. "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it. How often I would gather your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wing, and you are not willing." Or you could say, "How often would I gather your sheep together as a shepherd gathers the sheep, but you're not willing. See, your house is left to you desolate. For I tell you, you will not see me again until you say, 'Blessed is he that comes in the name of the Lord.'" And with that, he leaves. Leaves the temple for the last time. He heads out. Jesus left the temple. Is going away, and his disciples came to him, and you can just kind of grasp this feeling. He just pronounced this woe, saying everything is exactly as it is, did not mince words, did not make anything, sugarcoat anything. And he's leaving the temple, and his disciples came to him, pointing out the buildings of the temple, and he said to them, "You see all these things, do you not? Truly I say to you, there will not be left one stone among another that will not be thrown down." As Jesus sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately and said, "Tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age?" And Jesus answered them, "See that no one leads you astray, for many will come in my name, saying, 'I am the Christ,' and they will lead many astray. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not alarmed, for this must take place. But the end is not yet. A nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginning of birth pains. And they will deliver you up to the tribulation and put you to death, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. And then many will fall away and betray one another and hate one another. And many false prophets will arise and lead many astray. And because lawlessness will be increased, the love of many will grow cold. But the one who endures to the end will be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be proclaimed throughout the whole world as a testimony to all nations. And then the end will come. So when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. That's kind of in a quotes that may have not been in the original text, but it was a scribe note that was put in there. And let those who are in Judah flee to the mountains. Let those who are in the housetop not go down to take what is in his house. And let the one who is in the field not turn back to take his cloak. And also the women, and last for the women who are pregnant and those who are nursing infants in those days. Pray that your flight may not be in winter, nor in the Sabbath, for then there will be great tribulation, such as had not been from the beginning of the world until now, and never will be. And if those days have not been cut short, no human being will be saved. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short. Then if anyone says to you, look, here's the Christ, or there he is, do not believe it. For false Christs and false prophets will arise and perform great signs and wonders, so to lead astray, even if possible, even the elect. See, I have told you beforehand. So if they say to you, look, he is in the wilderness, do not go out. If they say, look, he is in inner rooms, do not believe it. For as lightning comes from the east and shines as far as the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. Wherever the corpse is, there the vultures will gather. Okay, let's dissect it a little bit. Jesus is foretelling the destruction of the temple. And there's possibly, when you read this, there's possibly a future component to this as well. Prophecy is a little interesting. We'll get to this a little more later, so I don't want to talk too soon on this. But prophecy often has an immediate thing that's talking about. And then sometimes it has a midterm. This is talking about sometime in the future. And then it has a later one. And sometimes it is stacked up many layers deep. And one of the hard things about understanding prophecy is sometimes we want to try to put it all in one package when it might not all be in one package when the fulfillment is going to happen. This is probably Jesus' biggest time of talking about future events. There's some other books in the Bible, Revelations, Daniel, a few others that talk a lot about future events. Jesus does not talk about future events a lot. But this chapter here, he spends quite a bit of time on it. So he leaves the temple and was going away. Remember, he's just gave these woes to the leadership and saying how bad things are. And he's leaving the temple of his dad, his father's house, leaving his father's house after saying all this, and probably a little discouraged. I would guess he's leaving as a rejected king. And his disciples come up to him. They're probably trying to lift the spirits a little bit. And they're saying, look at the temple. Look at the big, marvelous stones. What they're actually saying is, as long as the temple is there, we have hope. That's their viewpoint. As long as the temple is there, then God is in our midst. As long as God is in our midst, there is hope. Don't be so discouraged. Don't be so dejected. Don't be so let down about your rejection. There's still the temple. We still have hope because the temple stands. Jesus says, well, the temple is going to be destroyed. See all these stones here? These big wonderful stones you're seeing? It's all going to be destroyed. And in just a few years after that, 70 AD, the temple was destroyed. A couple of things that happened. Titus came from the Roman legions and came to wipe out Jerusalem. There's some indication that Titus actually wanted to save the temple as a kind of a historical landmark because it was probably one of the 7 wonders of the world at that point in time. It was a pretty magnificent building. But one account says his soldiers were so overcome with passion and they destroyed it. Another account says that he understood that he was not going to be able to save it, so he just ordered the destruction of it. Don't really know. But a fire broke out in the temple, and it melted all the gold that was on it. The whole building was covered in gold. Melted the gold, it ran down the foundations. The fire was so hot that the limestone just shattered, just kind of exploded. And limestone would do that. That's something we just like to do. We'd like to make a big hot fire and throw some limestone in it, and especially had a little moisture in it, the thing would blow up. The rock would blow up. You didn't want to be close by when it blew up, but it would just crumble. And that's what happened to the stones. Some stones were big pieces. They threw them off into the valley. Some they just shoveled out with shovels because after limestone gets hot, it gets brittle, and you can shovel it like dirt. But they were able to screed all the gold out of it and took the gold back to Rome with them. Every rock was destroyed except for the Wailing Wall, the Western Wall. Everything else was destroyed. It is said afterwards that you could not even figure out where the temple once stood. This is a huge temple with rocks that probably, according to Josephus, the rocks were approximately 30 feet long and 3 foot thick, 3 foot square. It's big rocks. And they were so destroyed they couldn't even tell where these rocks had once stood. Yeah, the temple was destroyed. After Jesus says that the temple is going to be destroyed, he goes to the Mount of Olives. Disciples came privately to him. They ask him, "Tell us, when will these things be?" First question, what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? This, in their mind, is all one question. They see this is all going to happen at one time. They see that the Messiah is going to come. He's going to cleanse the temple. He's going to restore the kingdom to Israel. And that's going to be the end of the age of occupation. And Jesus does not respond to the whole thing. Instead, he just responds to part of it. He says, "See that no one leads you astray. Many will come in my name saying, I am Christ, and will lead many astray." Huh, interesting. Is that much of an answer? Not really. And then he says, in the next verse, he says, there's going to be lots of fighting going on, lots of wars, rumors of wars, civil unrest throughout the world. That's not the end yet. Nations are going to rise against nation. War is going to be all over the world. There's going to be famine and earthquakes. And these are the beginning of birth pains. Now, I've watched my wife give birth a couple times, and the beginning of birth pains is nothing compared to what happens later. This is the beginning. He says, all the bad things you're going to see happen, that's just the beginning. Get your popcorn, hold on, it's going to get a lot worse. He says, they're going to deliver you up to tribulations and put you to death. And you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. They're going to persecute you. They're going to come after you. And many will fall away. Many people who are following me are going to fall away and hate one another. There's going to be apostasy. People falling away. There's going to be many false prophets. There's going to be deception. And there's going to be lawlessness. Why? Because the love of many will grow cold. There's going to be no passion, no lawfulness. And people are just going to do whatever they want to do and not have something to rally around. You know, us as humans do best when we have some sort of mission to rally around. If you don't have anything to live for, any mission to live for, very quickly cultures collapse, people collapse. Even if we have something to live for that we know we can't obtain, it's too big for us to get done in our lifetime, we can do fairly well as a people. But when we have nothing to live for, just everything falls apart. Why do they have nothing to live for? Because they have no passion, no love for God. If you want to wonder why so people in this world have nothing to live for, it's because there's no love for God. God is the only one who can give a worthwhile passion for something, worthwhile mission for something. But then he gives this phrase in verse 13, but the one who endures to the end, what does endure mean? That's an old word. The elderly in the room, what does endure mean?
Stick with it.
Stick with it? Yeah? Endure, you persevere, perseverance. That's the idea. One who endures to the end will be saved. 14, and the kingdom of heaven will be proclaimed throughout the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. Finally, he gets to the point of when the end is going to come. But if you remember, they asked him what? When are these things going to be? Temple's going to be destroyed. And he doesn't really answer all those questions, but the end is going to come. Kind of gives them the answer they need, not necessarily the answer they were asking for. Okay, a little bit of a note on that last part there. Sometimes people will say, well, Jesus can't come back yet because there's many unreached people groups. The nations there, or the whole world, King James says nations, that word is ta, ethnic groups. And he says, when the gospel is proclaimed to all ethnic groups, then the end will come. And we know there are tribes out there that have not heard the gospel, at least in recent times. And so we can assume that Jesus can't come back yet. Maybe logical thinking. A couple problems with that. First of all, while it is the mission of the church to take the message to all these people, there's nothing saying that only the church will do it. Sometimes God appears to some of these people in visions, angels, and sometimes that pronounces. So we don't know when will God say, enough of the church, you have wasted enough time, I'm going to send my angel fleet out there and he's going to take care of the rest and I'm going to come. Don't know, maybe. But the next thing that we don't often take in consideration is it's quite possible most of the world has been reached already. The green areas are all areas that may have been reached in the first 500 years. We don't know for sure because records are a little bit scant. If you hop on a boat and you sail to Indonesia and you spend your life ministering there, the people back home never knew what happened to you. They don't know if you sank at sea, if you actually got there, where you landed, and what you did. And so we don't have good records. But we do have stories that have popped up in many of these tribes, stories that sound an awful lot about like a Messiah who died and came back to life, passed down oral tradition. And it's quite possible that many of these areas did hear the gospel of Christ in the first 500 years. And we talked about this a number of weeks ago in the history session. So we should not assume that just because every little tribe in China has not heard the gospel in the last 200 years that we record of, does not mean they have not heard it early on. Maybe there is very few tribes left. We don't know. We're fairly certain that the Americas were not impacted with the gospel in the first 500 years. We're fairly certain that Australia was not impacted. But there's no guarantee of that either. There's some indication that there was some Jewish people and possibly some Christians who settled in here somewhere around 600. So if you hear that idea that Jesus can't come back because all the nations have heard yet, sleep on that one a little bit. Maybe they have heard or very close to being here. I think one thing we can say is not all the nations have heard yet because Jesus has not returned. But we can't say Jesus can't return because the nations have not heard. Distinct difference. 15, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel, standing in a holy place, let the reader understand. And again, that let the reader understand is a little bit of a scribal note. We think it might be in the original text, but it's probably a scribe note. This is the passage that he's referring to, and I took out some of the imagery because it's hard to put it together, but I kind of paraphrase it down, and I think we can understand what he's saying. After the anointed one will be put to death and have nothing. This is Daniel speaking 600 years prior to this time. Anointed one will be put to death and will have nothing. Anointed one is Jesus. Then the people of the ruler who will come to destroy the city and the sanctuary. Who is that? Well, that's the Romans. The end will come like a flood. And if you read into the accounts there, it was very much like a flood. They just kind of washed in and destroyed everything. War will continue until the end, and the desolation has been decreed. He will put an end to sacrifice and offerings. He destroyed the temple. And after the temple, he will set up an abomination that causes desolation. Destroyed everything. Till the end that is decreed is poured out on him. The idea that this is going to be destroyed. And this is, Daniel has prophesied this many years earlier. Jesus highlights back to that. So he says, when you see the abomination desolation spoken by the prophet Daniel, I'm going to get back there. Then let those who are in Judah flee to the mountains. When you see this wave coming, this flood coming, flee to the mountains. Let him who is on the housetop not go down to take what is in the house. Let the one who is in the field not turn back for his cloak. And you know what? When the destruction of Israel or Jerusalem happened, it is thought that very few Christians died, possibly none, because they saw it coming. They knew Jesus' words well, and they fled. They fled up north to places like Edessa, up in the 200 or 300 miles north in the hills. They fled up there. They fled down to Egypt. They fled, and they got out of there. And while the destruction of Jerusalem was complete, thousands of people, possibly hundreds of thousands of people, it depends on how we understand the numbers. Josephus talks about it quite a bit in the wars of the Jewish wars. He talks about it quite a bit, and there's some numbers that say it could have been a couple 100,000 people that were killed by Rome. The Christians were not part of that because they understood Jesus' teaching and they fled. Which gets us back to prophecy. How do we deal with prophecy? Now, the Jewish people, the scribes and leaders in Jesus' time, thought they knew exactly how the Messiah was going to come. And when Jesus did not come in their prescribed way, they missed him. Because they understood prophecy better than the prophets and the prophet themselves, and better than prophecy themselves. They understood it, and so they missed Jesus. They missed the Messiah. And you know, many people have had that problem in the last 2,000 years as well. We think we understand the prophecy, and we have it all booked out. You can buy books and pictures and diagrams that have it all figured out exactly how it's going to come to pass. Isn't that the same mistake the Jewish people did with Jesus the first time? I'm going to propose we do it differently. Instead of figuring out prophecy, understanding prophecy, instead we study and familiarize ourselves with the prophecy. But we hold our interpretations loosely. You can't study something too long without thinking you understand it, but hold those interpretations very loosely. Then when the events begin to happen, when you see the horde of Romans coming, you humbly ask God if this is the answer to prophecy, and you act upon it. So it's more, rather than figuring out what's going to happen in the future, it is recognizing prophecy, recognizing current events, fitting it in, and acting accordingly. That's a better way of dealing with prophecy. And it's interesting, when it talks about prophecy, a number of times the Bible tells us to read and study prophecy. It does not tell us to understand prophecy. Revelation says it twice. There's a blessing to those who study this book. It does not say those who understand this book. So when we talk about prophecy, hold it a little loosely, our interpretation of it. Maybe we don't quite understand everything that's going to happen. You could have taken this prophecy here, and you could have, if you were in that time frame, you could have thought something very different than what actually happened. But when it happened, we can see it. We look back and say, oh yes, it fits right in. Okay, back to the text. If those days had not been cut short, no human being would be saved. And this is again talking about, I think, the destruction of Israel, maybe a future time as well. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short, Jesus says. Cut short, what does that mean? Well, the idea that the destruction is not everlasting. It is terminated. Destruction happens and then it's ended. If the Roman army would have continued on, destroying every Jew they found, the church would have suffered a lot more. But they stopped. When they conquered Jerusalem, they stopped. And they returned to Rome. And then again, it has this warning about these people who are going to come claiming to be Christ. Then if anyone says to you, look, here is Christ, or there he is, don't believe it. Because there's going to be false Christs. And false prophets will arise and perform great signs and wonders so as to lead us astray, if possible, even the elect. They're going to try to infiltrate the church and lead the church astray. And then he says, this is how I'm going to return so that you don't follow all these false Christs. I'm going to return as lightning comes. Like that. You're not going to have time to say, I wonder if that was the Christ or not. The evidence is, if you're able to hide Christ's return, if there's any doubt of this, whether this is Christ's return, then he's not returned. It will be immediate. And if there's any doubt, he hasn't returned. So if there's anybody that pops up and you say, is this Christ or is this Christ's return? If there's any doubt in your mind, it's not him. It's something else. You'll immediately know when it happens. And then he has this last little phrase here. Wherever the corpse is, there the vultures will gather. And what does that mean and why is it there? Wherever the corpse is, there the vultures will gather. That's just a weird thing to throw in there. Yesterday I was out kayaking with Brielle, and I don't know if you saw him, over on the right hand side there was a bunch of vultures up in one of the high trees. They were gathered there. Why were they gathered in that tree? Something died. There's evidence that something died right there just looking at the vultures. So if you see vultures, lots of vultures circling, something's dead. And this is he's saying the evidence will be clear. You don't ever see vultures circling and say, I wonder if they're just out for a sightseeing tour. No. If vultures are gathering, there's something dead. And the evidence of the vultures, so it's some hard evidence. So what's the point of this whole text? The main message of the passage is understood when we look at the writing structure. And it's something we often miss in the West because we line up, and I've talked about this before, so it's not new. We line up our stuff point A, point B, point C, point D. That's not how they wrote. They wrote in a chasm or a key structure, something it's called. They would have reflecting points. And the key is always in the middle. You have reflecting points both sides. So when you see a passage and you say, didn't I just read this? You have it back here. You have, watch out, there's going to be false prophets, false Christ, people are going to lead you astray. And then later on it says the same thing again. That tells you he's writing in a chiasm structure. Look in the middle someplace. Someplace in the middle there is the main point. So let's look at the key here. You say have the temple destroyed. There's hard evidence. Temple is destroyed. You can't deny it. Temple is destroyed. Down here you also have some hard evidence. Wherever the corpse is, there the vultures will gather. You have that hard evidence that's kind of packaging this whole unit of writing together. And then your next one, you have, see that no one leads you astray. Many will be led astray. Down here, if anyone says, you look, there's a Christ, do not believe. Watch out, there's going to be false teachers, false prophets. Again, mirrored. Nation will rise against nations. Unless the days are shortened, there will be no life. This fighting is going to create this destruction. Verse 9, you have talked about the tribulation and the martyrdom. And then in verse 21, again, there will be a great tribulation. It has this echoing about the believers are going to suffer. Get ready for it. False prophets are going to rise, lead many astray. But instead of being led astray, flee to the mountains. It's kind of the idea there. And then the last one, lawlessness will be increased. The love of many will grow cold. And isn't that what happened at the temple? You have the desolation. Just total loss of love, loss of everything, desolation. And right in the middle, you have the key. Persist and preach the gospel. But the one who endures to the end will be saved. Persist, endure, keep going, and preach the gospel. And the gospel kingdom will be proclaimed throughout the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. So it's telling us, in the middle of all this prophecy, all this doom and gloom, there is a message. What are you supposed to do? Now, you can read doom and gloom, you can read prophecy, you can read stuff that's really hard, and you can just kind of say, oh man, throw up my hands, walk around like Eeyore the rest of my life, because life is going to get rough. No, that's not what we're supposed to do. We're not supposed to walk around like Eeyore the rest of our life. We're supposed to be persistent, enduring to the end, and proclaiming the gospel. That's the message that is in here. And the song that we sang the last there, though the nations rage, kingdoms rise and fall, there's still one king reigning over all. So I will not fear, for this truth remains, that my God is the Ancient of Days. He's the God who cared for David, was a shepherd to David, and he's the God today. And we can look at the world around us and see all the pain and the suffering and the corruption and everything that's here. It's just a bad place. And we can just kind of throw up our hands and say, life's hopeless. But it's not hopeless if we have a mission. And the mission is persist, continue on, and preach Christ. That's our mission. And you and I can die doing that, and we still have a worthwhile life, a purposeful life, a life of loving God. We can die doing that. It's still worth it. The mission continues on. Nations fail, nations rage, kingdoms rise and fall. There is still one king reigning over all. Let's pray. Thank you, Father, for giving us some clues to what your church is going to face. Making us aware of what's happening around us so that we can be prepared when the time comes. And thank you for giving us a mission that's bigger than ourselves, a mission that's bigger than what we can accomplish in our lifetimes. Something worth living for, loving you and representing you. In Jesus' name, amen. Mike, can we lead discussion time?